Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, hello there.
Oh, good. I'm just putting my phone. I just realized my phone needs to be on vibrate.
It's okay. So, welcome everybody. I think people are coming into the room still. If you could take a moment as you come into the room and enter your name in the chat, that would be great. We'll give everyone just a second. I don't see anybody. So,
No, I think it's just me and you. Okay,
give it just
found it.
another second or two. I know they were on a break. I'm just texting. I'm getting instructions here. Okay. Well, there are 12 people in this room, so we are good to go, and I think others will join us. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are enjoying your time at Nonprofit Academy, and you've saved, the scintillating topic of data and redesigning programs for the late afternoon. So hopefully you've had a little cup of tea or coffee and are good to go. My name is Laura Deitrick, and I am the Associate Director of the Nonprofit Institute, and have for a long time, since the inception of Nonprofit Academy, had the good fortune of working with my colleague, Valerie Nash, who's principal at Nash and Associates, who's in the screen below. And she'll actually take command of this whole show in just a second. We will have time for questions, and the chat is being monitored. So by all means, raise questions as we go along. The time is short, and Valerie and our contact is available, and we could talk about this topic forever. So by all means, you're more than welcome to reach out to us after the fact. You can advance to the next slide, please. Valerie, do you want to take it from here? What we're calling real-time program redesign, and talk maybe just for a second or two about what you've been doing during COVID-19 in your practice.
Well, I've been working with a lot of clients on helping them kind of come up with the either revising their programs to accommodate the new reality or the new normal, as we seem to be calling it. Helping clients collect data so that they can inform those designs, writing grant applications to get funding. So I'd say that probably 80% of my workload has probably shifted to be focused on helping collaborations and clients, different people, both in Canada and San Diego, work on these program redesigns. So yeah, fun
So
times.
When Valerie and I were talking about this, she said it's not even redesign; it's design, redesign, and then redesign again. All because I think all of us who do any programmatic work realize there's very short timelines, changing needs, new knowledge is emerging every day, and funding sources are shifting to meet these new needs. So that brings us to today. We thought we would spend a little time talking about the redesign. We usually spend a lot of time talking about the design process, but we're going to talk more about the redesign process in this particular session. And you can skip to the next slide, please. Go ahead, Val.
So yeah, so this is basically the agenda to today is talking. I mean, I talk about flying in uncharted territory. So the analogy I've been using is that it feels very much like we're building a plane as we're flying it, right? I'm climbing it on the wing and I'm strapping on wheels and I'm doing all kinds of things. We don't have the luxury of being able to kind of stop and say, let's design something and spend months on it. It's like we've got to be redesigning things for next week or tomorrow or next month. So we're going to talk about what we've learned, what we feel has worked. Definitely a lot of conversation about the factors that are influencing design decisions. And then we have a couple of interesting case studies for you. So next
Go ahead.
slide. Yeah, I mean, I felt like it was important to acknowledge that those of us who are working in this space are working in a completely different environment. We're most of us working remotely. I know I am. I'm actually in Canada, if you can believe, and I'm missing my normal visits to San Diego. Definitely have short time frames. I don't know if any of you are on the call responded to the county RFP, where they put out a call for proposals on Friday afternoon at 2 with a deadline of Tuesday for a design to be completed, right? To do community health outreach. So definitely short time frames. We're working with clients or colleagues who are under a lot of pressure. And then on top of that, we've got our own personal challenges, either with childcare or just lack of equipment or whatever it is, right? So the environment that we're working in is definitely different and less than ideal. I mean, I don't know if anyone, I can't actually see the chat, so I don't know if anyone wants to add in, just for the sake of collecting information, if you've got challenges of your own or you want to add to this, feel free to do so. But next slide, it's moving along.
We definitely wanted to acknowledge that, and then before we dive into the technical parts of this, talk about care for ourselves a little bit. So if you can move to the next slide. There we go.
Yeah, so these are some of our survival tips. So definitely practicing self-care and forgiveness, whatever that looks like, whatever self-care looks like to you, whether or not it's reading or going for walks, or in my case, watching really bad television. And then just forgiveness, which kind of connects to the last point about not striving for perfection. This isn't the time for us to be getting all, really being too concerned with things being perfect. Done is better than perfect in many cases here. Avoiding unnecessary stress, establishing work boundaries, keeping things simple, all these things. And then communicating with funders, that's definitely something that I found to be really, really valuable. Funders are in this with you. I mean, those of you who work with funding partners, there's definitely a changing environment in the funder landscape, where funders are wanting to hear from their grantees or their partners, having a willingness to be flexible. Definitely the sense that we're all working in this together, and taking advantage of that as being the new landscape is definitely helpful. Laura, do you have anything to add?
No, go ahead and flip to the next slide, because I'm going to say a couple things on there. So we call this originally, like I said, we normally teach program design, and in this case, we're calling it redesign. I can't imagine anybody, I'd be hard pressed to think of anybody who's doing their program as usual. I'm sure somebody will give me an example now, maybe like food banks, and even that, no, nobody's doing their programs the way they were prior to March, right? It's just not happening, which means everybody has been in a redesign mode. And for Valerie and I have spent better part of the last 10 years really working, especially with small to mid-sized organizations, on design and on how to really build programs that have impact. They already, I think a lot of on the ground programs already have a lot of impact, but how do we convey that, and how do we really think about how our programs connect to actual outcomes? So before we start in, I just wanted to we're not going to have time today, but I wanted to give the highlights of what we would normally say is good program design. And I think this really ties so closely to, I hope all of you got to hear, and if you didn't get to hear, I'd go back and do the replay on the second plenary this morning with Nancy and Maldonado, talking about community need. So everything that we're going to talk about right now is based on an assumption. It's based on Valerie and I are going to assume, because we don't have time to talk about it today, that you have done good needs assessment in the community. That means you don't have a great idea and superimpose it on the community, that you've actually been in the community, you've discussed and talked about and researched the needs of the community. We would not want to necessarily intimate that, because the next slide is going to say start with outcomes, but please know that our basic modus operandi is community involvement in program design from day one, all the way through to evaluation. And we've done some really fun things. If we have time at the end, we'll talk about how we involve community in evaluation work. So the best practices around program design really are, is there actually a need? Is there a documented need for your program, not just your own desire to do it or a funder's desire to fund it? Is the program intervention or plan based on any sort of research? Do you have any proof that what you're going to do might actually work? And then, did it work? Do you collect any data and information about whether it actually worked, whether it needs to be tweaked, or whether it needs to be, sent back for a total redesign? So this is the backdrop against which we're going to proceed with this idea of redesign. And please know that it is based on the fact that you've already well-established need for what you're going to do. You can slip to the next slide. And it's all you, Valerie.
Oh, okay. Right. So, those of you who may have taken our classes before, we're very fixated on outcomes. Outcomes are definitely what drives a lot of the work that you all do is what the results are, what the changes that you want to make. And those are, so even though we're redesigning, we don't let go of the focus of, designing and build everything around what you want to happen as a result of your work. So that's still the same. And then just to remind everybody about what an outcome is and what an outcome is not. So an outcome is what you want to have happen as a result of your work, what changes. It's typically measured by a change in attitude, knowledge, behavior, or circumstance. And what an outcome is not. An outcome is not something like how many people you served, how many classes you delivered, those kind of things. Those are what we would call outputs. So your budget is spent on achieving outputs. The purpose of the outputs is to achieve an outcome. That's typically how it works. It works in program design. It doesn't change because we're doing program redesign. We still have to think about what the outcomes are. So we can go to the next slide. That would be awesome. Okay, so here's what makes it different, right? Everyone right now, this is what makes what we're living through both fascinating, if we can divorce ourselves from the bad stuff, is that almost universally everyone, regardless of what they're doing, what kind of program they have or project, lay it onto your usual outcomes are these what I'm calling universal COVID-19 goals and outcomes. So everyone right now, we're all accountable for preventing the spread of COVID-19. We're all accountable for a short-term outcome of improving adherence to public health requirements. Whether we're measuring that or not doesn't matter, but that's something we're all being called upon to do. And then, of course, we're all working towards a long-term outcome of reducing the COVID-19 related mortality rate. Now, we could probably spend more time on COVID-19 goals and outcomes, but I don't want to do that. I just want to kind of just point out the obvious, that this is what's driving our program redesign largely, is that we're now having to do what we already were doing, and now we have to do this too. So we're working towards these outcomes. Anything else?
Valerie,
Anyone
would you
want to add
say
anything?
So Valerie, in the redesign, so let's use an example of an after school program or something like that, and now it's all virtual, and so it's much more than just we got our kids virtually set up, right? I think what you're saying is that you're gonna find that funders and folks that are seeking to fund programs are also going to be looking for you to include some kinds of goals and outcomes around COVID-19.
I'm already seeing in proposals that are outright, even proposals that have got nothing to do with COVID-19 and are looking forward to the future. I'm writing one right now that's to do with increased access to parks. And there's questions in there around safety. And I know that the subtext is, how are you going to do this work if nothing, if we're still in this same position, right? How are you going to ensure the safety of the participants? So definitely. What's on next? Yeah. Next slide. So these are the questions that I've been asking and my clients, and we're working. So what we're asking is, first of all, what non-COVID-19 outcomes are we aiming to achieve? And often that's the same as you were aiming to achieve before. If you were a program that was working to reduce homelessness, that's still your purpose. That's still your outcome. Next question is, are these outcomes still relevant? Because in some cases, it's not as relevant. they're not as timely, and they're not reflecting the priorities and needs of the people that you're serving. So you've got to kind of have that hard conversation. I'm trying to give you an example. So some of the prevention work that people may have been doing, even though it's still relevant to do teen pregnancy prevention, for example, that outcomes related to that are still relevant, they're still important, but are they the most timely outcomes right now? Do they reflect priorities and needs of the people we're serving? I'd argue no, really. So organizations might want to look at shifting, how they may, not that they, if they're contracted to still do that work, they still need to do it, but they may do something different. Yeah, that's true. Museums forced to change almost everything. Yeah, Nicole, hi. Yeah, I mean, now you still have the outcome that the museums still have their same outcomes, right? I mean, you're still, I don't know what your outcomes are, but maybe it's to, improve people's understanding of culture or whatever, it would be. Nicole, can you write in the chat what your, an example of one of your outcomes that might be useful for us?
Yeah, but a lot of museums have education programs, right? They supplement public education with arts and culture education, so they're closed. So, but they still have these. I'm thinking of some work we've been doing with organizations in Balboa Park. So, and school is back in session. So, in some respects, they're actually needed more than ever. So, there's actually a more of a demand because public schools, at least where we are, where they're closed, have need for online material. So while we're waiting, I mean, if Nicole, if your thing comes back up, that's great, and we'll address it. But I think that yeah, you get the point here. So in this case, in the case of a museum, some of this is about framing, right? So I don't know how to reframe your teen pregnancy one as well, Valerie, but I mean, in this museum piece, like I said, I could really reframe it that, gosh, we're more relevant than ever because schools need us, right?
Well, I can tell you we're reframing the teen pregnancy around resiliency. Because while teen pregnancy prevention may not be a priority outcome, promoting teen resiliency is a priority outcome because we know that COVID-19 is impacting teens and children in a big way. So kind of basically what we're looking at is looking at the work with this new framework and thinking, how do we adjust things? Do we maybe we shift something to work more in one space or put a different emphasis? So this is just basically the conversation that we have up the front, which is, do we need to modify outcomes? And how do we best accommodate those COVID-19 outcomes around safety and promoting, good behaviors, in terms of adherence to public health requirements. So this is a conversation we have at the beginning of the work. So do you want to go to the next one? So yeah, so these are the considerations. This is what people are bearing in mind as they're designing their programs. One, we've all witnessed that public health guidelines are very much subject to changes. What was the guideline a month ago is different. It's just lots of changes. You may have contractual obligations that must be met or renegotiated, right? So if you're under contract and your funder is saying, no, I still expect you to do that, you kind of need to try and figure out how to do it. But the better track is to try and renegotiate those obligations. And most funders are being really willing to do that. You might have community expectations that must be met. You've still got your values and principles. Who you are as an organization hasn't changed. If you value collaboration, if you have principles around trauma-informed care or youth engagement, they still need to guide your operations. Other factors are the type and scope of programs and services you provide. Obviously, someone who's running a museum is in a different place than somebody who's running a food bank, right? So obviously that's a factor. Another huge one is, what are the resiliencies and vulnerabilities of the populations that you're serving? I did some work here locally. I'm living in Canada right now, and they with an organization I work with works with lots of different populations, and they knew that they had some isolated seniors who had different vulnerabilities around their health impact, as opposed to the transition age youth that they were serving. Another one would be what kind of access to resources you have to support your redesign. And then, of course, Laura will be very happy to see this one on the list, around considering, what's worked before. Is there any evidence base or any research base to say that what you're trying is going to work? Now, obviously, in many cases, there isn't a lot of research on what we're doing, but in some cases there is. Did you have anything to elaborate on that, Laura?
No, I'm going to weigh in just a second. Let me just look at.
I'm looking at Tom's question.
Yeah, should we be redesigning for different scenarios? The right answer is, of course, yes. I don't really even know what to see in the crystal ball, right? I think that you have to. I think I remember Governor Newsom saying it's going to be kind of like a toggle switch, like forward, backwards, forward, backwards. So we'll see, but and I'm not sure you can even think about 5 years from now, except for to say, keep reading and keep seeing what people are projecting. I shared this study with Valerie earlier this morning, a study that came out for anybody that's in education, talking about the lost economic impact of children being out of school on their learning and what that'll cost them later in their jobs. And we don't have to go into the science of that, but there's a lot of research coming out every day right now that you could be consuming and using in your redesign and using to justify the direction that maybe you're going in. So that's all I'll say for right now. I want to get to the.
I'll give a quick answer. So Tom, yes, and I know that the clients I'm working with are already doing this. They have a plan A and a plan B, and
Yep.
that are fairly well developed, and then they know that they may even have to have a plan C or D, right? So I have one client who was going to be doing a cooking lessons, not lessons. Anyway, so it's cooking, and their plan A is that they want to still do that, but they're going to do it trying to have the maintain physical distance between smaller groups and physical distance. But their plan B, if that isn't feasible, or the people don't come, their plan B is they're going to try and do it remotely and with people on Zoom and delivering ingredients to their houses. So yeah, they've got plan A and plan B. Makes it hard, definitely makes it difficult to plan. So let's see what we have next up, slide-wise. Oh, yeah. So when we do program design, I often talk about there's different phases that you go through. That you start off being a detective, and your job is to really kind of understand as much as you can about the challenge in front of you, the problem that you're trying to solve, the need that you're trying to address, right? And you still need to do that. You still need to ground your work in as much understanding of the situation as you possibly can. You don't just launch right in. Now, not only how you do them is changing, but the time period in what you don't have the luxury right now of spending months trying to understand something. You may just have days or weeks. The second phase is architect, which is you design your solution, you come up with your strategies. And the third phase is engineer, where you take that design and you figure out what does the staffing plan look like, what's the how do you operationalize the design? And those three phases still apply to redesign, but just how you do them is changing. So
go to the next slide. Yeah. I will be quick on this, but I'm going to talk about data collection in the time of COVID. So we talk consistently right now about how the timelines are really short. Everything is being done so quickly. That does not mean we have the luxury of not collecting data. Data is not a nice to have, especially right now. It is a must have, because up to the minute data is really an important commodity. If you layer on the racial justice issues, the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color. In some ways, this tragedy is providing an opportunity to break down structures if we take advantage of that opportunity and to share data and information about communities that sometimes are overlooked or not counted in decision making. So, if you're a community-based organization, keep collecting data about the people you serve. And if you don't have the bandwidth to collect data, use other people's data. Sandag has some excellent data out right now on the impact of COVID-19 on particular neighborhoods. And then everyone, I think, is dying to get their hands on the needs assessment that Nancy referred to this morning. And so we're hopefully going to be able to give that to all of you, where they've assessed the needs of 4,000 community members. So the reason why I always want you all to collect data is, one, so you can do your programs better and serve the people that you serve better. But I also want you to position yourself as experts, as the leaders. So the minute you collect data, call up all your elected representatives and say, you know what, I want to tell you about what's going on in XYZ community, and I have this information. And so you get a lot, there's a lot of benefit. And people are really willing to listen, because I think that they've realized what a lot of people realize is they really don't understand particular communities and particular neighborhoods, and they want to. So now's a really interesting opportunity to do that. So we can talk more if there's questions about that. Valerie?
Yeah, so we can flip to the next slide, and I'm going to kind of share you a case study. So one of my clients right now is the San Diego Refugee Communities Coalition. It's a coalition of ethnic community-based organizations, kind of came together September 2019, and now they've been thrown into the midst of the COVID-19 work. And we quickly realized very early on that there was going to be a need to get some really good data on how COVID-19 was impacting the refugee communities in San Diego County. So it's kind of, I look at this and I still can't believe we did this, but in less than 6 weeks, we created a survey instrument, reviewed it for cultural sensitivity, we recruited, when I say we, I mean the members of the coalition, and then UC San Diego's Center for Community Health Refugee Health Unit worked with my company. And we did all this great stuff that you can see on this slide. Administered a survey in 12 languages. So we administered the survey by phone, mostly by phone. And I think the next slide will show you the results, and you'll see why this was a useful thing to do, hopefully. So if we can go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. Well, this just shows you, I don't know why I put this on here. This is just the Survey Monkey that shows you, All right. So this is just one snippet of the findings. But I think if you look at this, you can see why this is important to have, and how the refugee community is now able to use this data to kind of garner support, to communicate with funders, to communicate with policymakers, to work internally, to figure out, I mean, we even kind of drilled down in some cases to look at, who are these families? Is there particular characteristics that they have, or even were there specific families that we needed to circle back to and help? Because there were some families who, when we looked at their survey, it was like, oh my gosh, we've got they're a family with 9 children, and they said that they had to move from their housing in the middle of all this. Anyway, so hopefully you guys can see why this is useful. And like Laura said, we have funders who are interested in receiving this. We have a meeting tomorrow with Dr. Luke Bergman from the County Behavioral Health to discuss the survey results and how the county is going to work with the refugee community. So probably one of the smarter things that we did was prioritize doing this survey. So anyway, so definitely a good thing to do. So any questions, or can we move on? So yep, redesign. I think that's just a space saver slide. Yeah, so these are some of the questions that we ask when we're doing a redesign is, why are we doing it? Where are we going to do it? When, how, what, and who? So these are just the big obvious questions. And I think the next slide is going to give us a little kind of an example. So if we can move on to the next slide. Yeah. So this is kind of a redesign at a glance based upon an actual case. So what I show you here, it's very rudimentary, and we could have other lines, but I want to kind of keep it simple. So basically, this was a project where the outcome was increased capacity for economic self-sufficiency. It was a skills training program working with young people, actually. Pre-COVID, the first column kind of summarizes what they were doing. They were doing skills training. They were doing in-person instruction in a classroom. They were meeting twice a week for 2 hours, and they had a trainer. Pretty straightforward, simple model. Come March, they had to redesign. They had to adjust. And so this is what they did. The outcome still was relevant. The why they had to do it was actually even more relevant. But what they did and how they did it had to change. They had to add in a layer of outreach because it was harder for them to actually access the clientele. They had to switch to do an online instruction, and they had to add in individual outreach to kind of maintain the connection with the clients. They had to, they were delivering it in home, right? I mean, they had to provide laptops to the clients. They had to shift it from twice a week to 4 times a week. And then they had to add in a peer leader because the certified trainer wasn't sufficient, staff wasn't sufficient to do this new design. Okay, moving into September, they're now changing it. They've had to do a redesign. Because in the meantime, they've modified their classroom, they've created an ability to do, they've put in plexiglass, they've put all those things in place where they can go back to a modified classroom environment. But it has to be with smaller groups. They still need to do the outreach. They had to change the when they did it, and they needed to keep the peer leader. So, slight modifications, but still, I mean, you can see that there's actually there's a lot of work going into each of those phases, both in terms of people's time and resources.
Well, I think the other thing I like about this chart, Valerie, is yes, it is simple, but first of all, it underscores that the outcome and the why of the program actually haven't changed, right? And it shows people that you're staying on track to your original goals because they are still appropriate. So, and it gives you that scenario planning in some ways. Now they know if they shut down again, they're going to go back to the middle column in some respects. There's a question. Is anyone specifically funding data collection or research components for nonprofits? That is a good question. Yes, they are to some degree, but we've been doing a lot of research here, but it's been unfunded. We've been getting funding after the fact or building it into, we renegotiated, but we're a research center, so it makes sense. Valerie, you want to tell how you funded your big survey?
So Daniela, we didn't, for the one that I just showed you, we didn't get any specific funding for that research. What we did was the organizations received general operating money from the San Diego Foundation, from Alliance Health, a bunch of local providers, Price Charities, Alliance Healthcare Foundation, California Endowment, the San Diego Foundation, gave money to the Refugee Coalition for COVID-19 related work. What I'm seeing is there's a lot of flexible funding around right now. And so we access that flexible funding and then internally determined that we wanted to allocate a percentage of it to data collection and research as a priority. So many grants state the funds cannot be used for research. The ones that we got didn't. It depends. So we were getting grants that were fine. They didn't specify actually really what the grants were for, other than general operating to support COVID-19 related work. So we were fortunate in that regards.
And we repurposed funding and used general operating funds. You got to kind of look at it as a long-term investment because they're going to be able, in the case of the Refugee Coalition, they've been able to leverage that or will be able to leverage that to further programmatic support. So
Yeah.
it's like, do you make the investment early on so that you can raise yourself up and raise up the profile of your organization as an expert?
Yeah.
And I think what, as a researcher, I like good research and I don't like shortcuts and corner cutting. But you have to respond. I mean, everything has a budget. You can still do good research if it's thoughtful and you think it through and get good results, or partner with us and we'll see, or call us and we can think through a research project with you, or sometimes you can use students and interns. So, because research can be extremely expensive and you might not see it as your as part of your mission. So again, the other thing I think Valerie and I would always say is, if somebody else has already done the research, don't do it yourself. So spend a little time looking, Googling the last 2 or 3 studies that came out about your target population, or what are people saying right now about the kinds of services you provide. There's a lot of stuff, as I was talking about earlier, that's coming out right now that you can tap into and use.
So I think we're ready to move on.
Yes.
So I think what's coming next is the tool that I think everyone should have received. Yeah. So I created a redesigning framework tool that you guys get to benefit from. So I just want to introduce you to that. You should have a copy of that sent to you or available for you to use at your will. I think the next slide kind of shows you a little snapshot. So this is the purpose of the tool. It's to guide redesign. These are all the kind of questions that the framework serves to answer. I think you can all kind of read that. Yeah, it kind of covers a lot of ground. Kind of a 4-page process. So I think the next slide.
Pause on that for just a second. Pause on that for just a second, Valerie. When Valerie first showed me the framework, I mean, it's very detailed. And the problem is when you do design work, you have to be detailed. Garbage in is garbage out, and you pay the price either at the beginning or you pay a bigger price at the end. And nobody gets up in the morning saying, I think I'll just kind of try and do a half-baked job today, right? And if we just get so busy and, trust me, zoomed out, stressed out, we still have to carve out this space, I think, to use these processes and to really plan well so that we can best serve our clients and our communities.
Yeah, and the way that I designed it was to be done kind of in a group, through like a group process, right? Yeah. So that the program managers could either all kind of get together and fill out like some questions about about their programs, and then they would work in a group with their direct service staff. So it was a framework that was involving all of the people who are involved in delivering the service, so managers and program staff predominantly. So if you want to kind of move on to the next one, I think
I'll just say one other thing about that. I think there's examples of it, so you can move on to the next one. But I think it's much like, typically if you're in a session with us, we teach logic modeling, right? And what is one purpose of building out a program logic model? It's so that you can make sure that everyone's on the same page. And so by involving multiple people, Tom, can you flip to the next slide, please? By involving multiple people in the project, and this is the first page of it, and you guys have a copy of it, it allows you to sit there for just a few minutes and have somebody from across the organization or in another department or in the fundraising to say, that doesn't make any sense. Or why are we doing that? Or I have extra resources. Can I help you with that piece? So it's also a tool for testing your basic assumptions. And I think it serves that purpose to have a conversation.
Yeah, so I just want to so this is what you're going to be looking at, and use it if you want. But but looking at things like for your client populations, what is the possible impact of COVID-19 on their physical health, on their mental health, on their economic stability, right? So again, the community that I was working with on this, most of the seniors that they were working with were on a fixed income, and they were not going to be facing any economic instability. So their fixed income wasn't changing, their housing was stable, but they definitely had some physical health. So when the staff completed this chart, for that particular population, they would put a high impact around physical health, but a kind of a low to moderate potential impact around their economic stability. And then somewhere in the middle around their mental health. And then they could make notes they brainstormed, you know, specific vulnerabilities or strengths that they know, because your staff, the people you work with, know who you're catering to, right? Like what the vulnerabilities or strengths or resiliencies are, and they definitely need to be factored into the design. Hopefully we're going to have Stephen Gillay on here in a moment, and he can talk specifically to this around their work with homeless youth. But yeah, so hopefully, you might find some value in this tool, and just use what you want and disregard anything that seems to be too complicated. And I think we're ready for Stephen.
Yeah, we're right on our time frame too. You and I usually go
good,
over.
Huh?
We're good.
Is he there? Where is he?
I know he's logged in. Here he comes. Valerie, you can introduce Stephen.
There he is. Hey, Stephen.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. Okay, now I'm at a disadvantage because I can't see our PowerPoint anymore. But that's okay.
We're going to figure that out. My face off the screen.
No, we want to see you there. Hi, Steve. So, Stephen, I don't know, were you listening to what went before, or did you just jump in?
I was able to pay attention to about the last 10 minutes or so.
Okay. All right. So you'll know that we're talking about redesign and redesign and redesign. Oops. There we go.
There we go.
So if I can't see you. Oh, it's happened.
That's okay. Just tell your story, Steve. We're good.
Yeah. So if you can just share with the people who are, who've joined us, what were some of the factors that you had to consider when you were redesigning your program? Let's start with that question. So what were the factors you considered when you were called upon, and maybe just choose one program as an example, like Tay Academy or Street Outreach, one of those.
Describe your work a little bit too.
Yeah, happy to describe it. I'm Associate Executive Director for San Diego Youth Services. We're a middle-sized to large-size youth-serving nonprofit organization in San Diego. Been around since 1970. Started with the first runaway and homeless emergency shelter for under 18-year-olds, and that's really our bread and butter as an agency, is working to prevent, and intervene with youth experiencing homelessness. We branched out to provide pathways of services and supports to help accomplish those goals. I think we were at an advantage in a lot of ways under the current pandemic, as well as the exacerbated crisis with racial inequity that was accelerated under these circumstances. We're also in somewhat of an advantage in the economic downturn that it looks like we're experiencing, and many nonprofits are. And I say at an advantage, which is kind of an interesting optimistic term, because in so many ways we were still reeling from the economic downturn of 2008, 2007 in that area, in which we learned that to be able to evolve as a nonprofit who has to build its budget on a 12-month period, we always have to have our philosophy of flexibility and adaptability. Now, anytime we build our resources around one pillar or one program, anytime a change happens in the community or internally in the organization, we see those programs at risk. And our core mission is not to take away good programs from our clientele and from our community. So we learned, to braid and blend our funding, to create a diverse portfolio, and to have a philosophy of flexibility based on taking the pulse of what's happening in the community. And so when the current crises really escalated, we had already had a very flexible strategic plan built that included feedback from the community, our service partners, as well as all levels of our organization. That feedback was critical in building in components of flexibility into our plan and approach. I heard Laura and Valerie talk earlier about options and having backup plans, plan A, B, and C. Literally, that is the nature of every single conversation around design or redesign. Every time you think a certain plan will work, there will always be a loophole or something throw your direction. I can't say very many programs come out the way that I ever thought they would in terms of how we got there. The end result is often in line with what we wanted at the beginning, but again, how we got there and the twists and turns and the set of narratives and stories and politics and funding and partners is always different than we originally imagined. And so building that approach and philosophy and right off the bat has been incredibly helpful for us during this time. And I would say the other area that I would want to make sure to highlight that is important is knowing our workforce. So for us as an organization, 80% to 85% of our funding goes to pay staff. And so our staff are the key interventionists for our work. They collect the data, they do the intervention, they're on the front lines and hearing the feedback directly from the communities. And ensuring that that workforce is taken care of and supported is absolutely vital to us. That is our research tool, that is our evaluation tool, that is our intervention tool. That literally is our bread and butter. We're in the business of making information, and that information to be good has to have a good starting place, which is our staff. So, we try to incorporate knowing our staff, who our staff are, their skill sets, making sure they're supported in everything we do. And that includes the racial inequities that are going on, making sure that our staff who are feeling it with their families and their communities and their neighborhoods are also incorporated into how we design our program, how we operate our agency. And then I'd say the last just kind of highlight piece where I give you an example of program changes. I think in our business, we have a luxury of allowing for a lot of grace. And I think, we're not building a bridge per se where there's no room for grace. You got to get it right. In our business, we have some room for grace. And I think, while we want to be planful, while we want to be mindful, we also know that the reason our organization is still around after 50 years and there's still homelessness and it's more of a problem in our community than ever before is because we just hadn't gotten it right yet. As such, we need to continue to try different things and evolve and learn from our approaches. And that's the idea of grace. This idea that, once we get it right, we're going to have to get a new career building bridges because we'll all be out of business. So in the meanwhile, until we get it right, we've got to continue to be supportive, using trauma-informed care principles with each other and understanding that we're all coming from different directions with a similar mission and hopefully achieving that similar mission of a healthy community together. And so I think a good example of all these principles outlined in application to what went on with the pandemic, we already had a strategic plan to take our services by adding telehealth components. So we were lucky in the sense that we had a strategic plan in our back pocket so that when our clinics who are serving youth in the community who are experiencing homelessness, and we had to close down our clinic or change the clinic to drop-in services and not lose those vital connections. It took us about 6 days to get those staff the IT equipment to be able to continue their services 100% remote. And that was because we had braided resources already available. We were able to tap into other dollars or unrestricted dollars from other programs that we as an agency mindfully collect for circumstances like this. We were able to leverage those funds in very short order. We were flexible. We were able to cut through any of the internal bureaucratic check cutting and approval processes that were just not necessary so that we could, purchase that equipment at large amounts very fast. And then we were able to leverage our quality management department, which has been coming up over the years, developing trainings and onboarding so that the staff could walk right in the door, know how to turn on that laptop, know how to use the MiFi, and be able to, at some degree, use healthy, confidential HIPAA approaches in engaging their clientele who are now sheltered down or quarantined in places that maybe they weren't before. And then I would say the last piece that was super helpful to those particular programs was leveraging other dollars in a creative way. And I think, Laura and Valerie, you described this as there's already existing dollars for what our business is called flex funds. So flex funds are emergency type dollars that can go to clients for special needs, like help pay rent, help provide emergency food or transportation. Well, oftentimes we hadn't had the opportunity to use those funds to, pay for internet or Wi-Fi or leverage cell phones or IT equipment. Well, in this case, in short order, we were able to use those funds, repurpose those funds, work with our funders, our different partners, in getting those funds to be able to be used so that that client who's experiencing homelessness, now sheltering in a new place that wasn't accustomed to them, and the only way they can maintain contact with their mental health professional, their behavioral health, and their case manager or peer support was through these means. We could then provide them these IT equipment in short order, have a short training support for them so that they can maintain those contacts. Again, for us, we were very successful. One of the prouder parts of my time was be able to take our organization of 250 staff. We had about 60 different contracts. We were 95% in-person live services prior to COVID. Within 6 days of the governor's shutdown orders, we were back at 80% services, but all through telehealth. And so that was pretty big feat. It was due to, again, these philosophies.
So Stephen, I think, some of this, we're talking about design, which sounds really mechanical, but now you're sort of talking about leadership, I think, and organizational culture a little bit. And would you agree that to be able to move that fast, that it is due in part to somehow your behaviors as an organization?
Well, I'll take that as a compliment, in terms of that. But, again, I think it is a great deal of that. But you also have to, when you're designing the building, you have to put in the back door, the emergency exit. And you got to build that in right off the bat. And you have to build in where you're going to put the fire extinguisher. So I think there's a lot of anticipation when you're going into building out programming or and certainly when you redesign, again, building out those options right from the start, and hopefully that you never have to use them, but you definitely want to, again, if you have good leadership experience, that will help inform redesign. And so when you're building out programs, you can put those safety ripcords in place.
Well, thank you. I always love watching you guys work. Such a committed staff, for sure. We have time for questions, concerns, challenges from whoever has anything they want to add, for sure. I don't know, Tom, if you see anything in the chat or not, because we could all clearly keep talking about this for a while.
Well, I heard you reference the SANDAG report that I think just came out today, and that was a number of nonprofits, including San Diego Youth Services, and under the guidance and leadership of South Bay Community Services and Mario Logan, and a lot of really, really great partners who came together. And I want to say it was like similar to your story, Valerie, in like 6 weeks' time to collect almost 4,000 surveys from community members. And it's a great document. SANDAG went above and beyond in putting that together with outlining what's going on, who's being affected, and what are the greatest needs. And so that document, if you haven't gotten your hands on it, I actually recommend. I was just reading it this morning again in its final version. And, it's going to be very helpful for us when we're writing grants. We're building and planning back doors. I saw a comment earlier about this 3 to 5 year. Do we open back up? What's the next pandemic, or what's the next crisis? The next fire? The next whatever it might be. But these data are really important when we are building out the options and writing the grants and designing the program and training the staff. So So yeah, very important. And the other piece that I would add in terms of the comment is build in evaluation whenever you can. And so evaluation is our way in the nonprofit world to get around an IRB. In some ways, jokes aside, right? But evaluation is a form of research. And it basically says, look, I'm building out a program that's not been done before, or I'm enhancing it. And I need to have some evaluative component into it to look at it and see how I'm doing. And so that data comes back in a feedback loop in real time so that I can pivot in real time under that current grant cycle to maximize the output and impact of that service. And that's the best type of research right there. It's real-time research. So how we fund most of the research in our organization is through building in evaluation in every grant that we can. And I can't underscore enough. So anytime our consultants, certainly Valerie or our other partners, recommend an evaluation component, we never say no. In fact, we look for that opportunity wherever, because it's our brand of getting that data. And it's super funny. We get evaluation data on one program, and sometimes it's more useful in another program than it is in that program that it was put in. And I think that's important to remember when we're talking about blending, braiding pathways of services through multiple funding.
I think that the way we teach evaluation here in our graduate programs is we teach it with program design. So evaluation, and you're intimating that, and I know Valerie would say, build the evaluation design at the very beginning. So here's a question. This is one I was thinking of too. Stephen, you must have a strong relationship with the board. They trust your leadership, and hence you're able to adjust programs. So I was thinking the same exact thing, Nicole. I'm like, what does that board look like? So we only have like 3 minutes left. Do you want to say a few words about how you are so nimble?
Yeah, well, I wish I could say the board trusts me. It's more likely they trust our CEO. Our CEO has been in the field for 35 years and very famous in at least our circles for his integrity, his commitment to the mission, and follow through. So he's built an incredible board. He supports a credible board. We actually have 2 boards. We have a foundation board who really does our market development and controls our assets. And then our other board is focused on the program and outcomes, which is really the board that I yield to. And so that board is built up of members who are subject matter experts. So in our strategic plan, we want to build out workforce development support. So we're going to get community experts who are representative of our clientele, and they're the ones that serve on that board. So they understand the need to be flexible. They understand the need to have experts on the ground level in programming and trust those recommendations, and then trust that they're going to get that information back to be able to put it in real time. But yeah, trust with your board is built over a long period of time. It doesn't come. It comes from years and years and years of getting good financials. It's not getting bad lawsuits, but standing in front of the lawsuits that are worth standing in front of. It's about showing in your annual outcome report that you are inching forwards to ending youth homelessness or whatever it is you have in there. So it is built over time. It's important to have a good team. We're famous for saying it's about 3 deep. You have to have some depth in your staff around you. So Walter's incredible. He's our CEO. And then we have an incredible CFO who's been a CFO in the nonprofit world for 40 years plus. And she always gets clean audits, and she knows how to take the money that we earn her on the program side and move it around in really creative ways that are ensure that passing the audit musters. So I think it's really about making sure those teams are performing. And again, having a good outline, a good design to guide you as we're going into unknown territory is super helpful to fall back on.
Okay, Laura, I think we're running out of time.
Yeah, Valerie, you get the last word.
Sorry, I had some unstable, some problems with the computer. But I think just the last comment I would want to make is that I think as much as this is proven to be really stressful, it's also showing the resilience of the nonprofit sector. The clients that I've been working, they're flying the plane. The plane hasn't crashed. We're in the air, back to that analogy. But yeah, I mean, I really feel like it's proving that the nonprofit sector in San Diego is doing well. We've got some good leadership, and we're gonna keep doing the work and achieving those outcomes, right, Laura?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. And we hope the rest of you have enjoyed Nonprofit Academy. And I think we are at our time boundary.
Yeah.
I don't know if they eject us from the airplane right now.
From the plane, that would be good.
Oh, they do. They play us off.